that's particularly positive or helpful to families?
Yeah, so the question is there anything I've seen communities do that can be particularly helpful as it relates to this issue or that's had a positive outcome? I've seen a few schools try things like technology-free days, where the kids kind of turn in their cell phone in their first class, grab it at the end of the day, and they go through the day, they get a reward or they get extra credit for something if they make it through the whole day without using their phone. So there's some sort of systems like that you can do. I'm the chair of a board for an organization called Live More, Screen Less that actually designs peer-to-peer education for schools on how to interact or have sort of peer leaders in the school environment help create healthy environments within the schools around technology use. So I'd be happy to send you more information about some of the work that they're doing. But I think the biggest thing that can happen from a community setting is kind of everybody having the same or similar rules. You know, if in one class phones are allowed and another class phones are not allowed, if, you know, there's differences and discrepancies, it becomes very difficult to kind of help manage it. But if you kind of come up with a policy collectively as a community about what your expectations are around technology use during the school day, that can be really beneficial, because otherwise it's hard for those parents that are kind of holding the line if there's other parents who are being a little bit more flexible, because then it's, well, Johnny's mom lets him do it, so why can't I? And that can create a difficult dialogue. But as a community, if you come up with a list of rules or expectations, you know, especially while they're in school, that can be a really powerful tool that you all can support each other on helping manage. So at least we know that while they're getting their education, they're not distracted by some of that stuff. Couple of questions over here.
Has there been any study or research on when the optimal time to sit your children down, age-wise, and walk through consequences with them to kind of plant that seed of this? Does actually walking through the consequences of this, watching, say, social dilemma with your kids, is there anything that's shown that that's helpful, or does that actually land?
So there's a couple of parts to that question. The question is there anything that shows that actually having conversations about the consequences is effective with your kids, or is there an optimal age to have those conversations? The reality is there isn't any one answer to that. So I'll answer the age part first. The age factor has to do with developmentally where your kids are at. So if you've got, you know, a really responsible, mature 12-year-old who's getting good grades and who's following through and handling their chores at home and being respectful, they may be ready for a device, and you can sit down and have the conversation then about what those expectations are. For other kids who are struggling in some areas, not following through, maybe not being as respectful or having some other challenges, maybe they're not ready till they're 15 or 16. So the age part is kind of dependent on where the kiddo is at, and you all know your kids. But as far as when do they have the conversation about expectations, I would say it's not one conversation, it's many. And the first one should happen when they get their first device, whether that's a Nintendo, I don't even know what they're called now, the little handheld Nintendos, or, you know, or if it's an iPhone, or if it's a Chromebook that they get through school. Whenever they get access to that first device would be the time to have the first conversation, and then to have ongoing conversations. One conversation typically isn't enough, but if it's something you're continually setting that expectation and then following through on what your boundaries and rules are for your household, at some point they may be more likely to take you serious for that. I think, you know, watching things like The Social Dilemma together as a family do create the opportunity for conversation. One thing I like to do is, Tech Talk Tuesdays at the dinner table. Every Tuesday, it's a conversation about something related to technology. What are you seeing on Snapchat lately, or what's the new app that you're using? Where just every Tuesday, that's kind of our conversation. And so that could be a way to sort of normalize the conversation in your family, in addition to using real life examples like watching a Netflix movie together and having that conversation. So you're more likely to be successful with sort of the consequences of negative behavior if you're having that constant communication and then following through on those consequences if you set any. There was another question behind you.
I was kind of also about the age of children and technology. Ours is young, 5. You take it away, you lose the mind of like, oh my gosh, you took a video away after 20 minutes. But then we risk being behind compared to peers who already at age 5 have fun and get full iPads.
Yeah.
Where's that balance of
Yeah, so every kid is different. I'll just start with that. There's no one answer. Every household is different. Sometimes households are split. You need a way to get a hold of your kids, or kids are in after school activities. You need to know when to go pick them up. I say that with the caveat that I was in after school activities and I didn't have a cell phone when I was in high school, and I still had my parents. I'm not still waiting at the high school for my parents to come to get me. So there is a way to plan for things like transportation, even if they don't have a device. So don't let that be the reason. But it's really setting the expectations. Yeah, kids need to know how to use these devices. If they don't, they're not going to go get anywhere. They're not going to know how to turn in assignments through their online thing and all these, any job that they're going to go into, regardless of what it is, going to require them to be knowing of technology. So it's about saying you can have access to this for an hour or for a half hour, and here's what the limit is. And if you demonstrate you can do that, and when it's time to be done, you're responsible, you don't throw a temper tantrum, you move on to the next thing, and you show that you can handle that and be mature, then we can increase that to an hour. And you can start to reward them with that activity as they demonstrate that they're able to handle it. One thing I'll tell you too, when you go through that thing of, I'm gonna take your phone overnight, and it creates absolute destruction in your household and attitudes, and you get the whole you're the worst parent ever. The one thing I'll tell you is I promise you that passes. I promise you it's going to be really tough for a couple of days where they hate you and they're probably not getting a lot of sleep because they are agitated and they're bothering you and they're trying to figure out ways to steal their phone back and all these other things. But there's been a lot of studies about kids who have had devices taken from them in that way or similar, who have reported after the fact they're grateful that they were able to go without the technology because they no longer felt the pressure to engage in it. And so they could just easily blame their parents. And I tell my kids to blame me all the time. If your kids are wondering why you don't have a cell phone, they're, my mom's mean, she won't let me have it. Blame me for whatever you want to blame me for. But they will get through that really difficult time when you're setting those expectations initially. But set them and gradually give them more freedom and opportunity as they demonstrate that they're behaving well. Other questions? Over here.
Probably the one capacity is over the age. I'm not sure maybe how to contextualize this, the answer maybe is obvious, but I've noticed in like work environments now, kind of that first generation of digital natives struggle with conversations, right? They're used to this, they can be sitting right here and they're talking to each other or whatever. And I think about that for them as well. Like, are they, yes, we're but they're still having other conversations. How do we help them learn how to have that connection where they're seeing these things or not rely on that to be able to get through it?
Sure, it's building in things in your everyday life that create the opportunity for those conversations to happen organically. A big one I'll tell you is having dinner at the dinner table. Technology has drastically shifted the way we have dinner. And a lot of times it's I'm gonna grab my dinner and go sit on the couch and put something on the TV, and we're sort of eating in a linear fashion. We're not all sitting around a table having a conversation. There's so much research that suggests that if you eat dinner even 3 or 4 times a week together as a family, that depression goes down, communication skills go up, the ability to manage challenging behaviors or difficulties increases, teen pregnancy rates go down. It's all these things that even you wouldn't think are related to that, but just by creating that time of togetherness, it sort of forces the opportunity for that to happen organically. So you want to create those opportunities. And then also setting the boundaries. Okay, we're going to go to a graduation party. So this next hour and a half as a family is tech-free time. On the car ride home, if everybody's good, you can have your device for the half-hour ride home. So that they're knowing, okay, I can have it, but right now this is the time we're going to be engaged and connected with families, and just continuously setting those expectations and looking for opportunities. In my house, we have a tech-free room. So if you're ever in the kitchen, you can't have a device. So if we're making dinner together, if we're baking, if we're eating, what have you, no devices. In fact, I was using my phone to look up a recipe when we were baking one time, and my daughter said, put your phone away. And I'm like, okay, well then I gotta go print out the recipe the old-fashioned way and look at it. But she even held me accountable so that at least in that space, we knew that we were sort of interacting with each other. And don't make it the laundry room or something where nobody wants to go. But if you pick kind of a main room in your house and say that room, we're saying intentionally, all of us collectively as a family, including parents, are going to be tech-free in that room. That can be also a healthy way to model that, and then engage in those conversations organically. Other questions? In the back. Wait till 8. Yep. So of all the research, I'll answer the first part of your question. The question is there's this movement called Wait Till 8 to try to get all parents to agree to wait until 8th grade to give their kids these devices, so that at least, again, we're kind of collectively in this as a community rather than the 12-year-old coming home and saying, well, Sarah's had one since she was 7. But even though it's hard to pinpoint an exact age for every kid, because every kid is so different, the research and science that we do have suggests that sort of the tipping point for that can be 8th grade. So if we can delay their use of devices until 8th grade, they're significantly less likely to develop long-term issues as a result of their technology use if you delay it that long. We see similar trends with drug use and other behaviors as well. So.
I like have no concept of how super into like I don't what's your advice?
Thank you for being vulnerable with that, because I promise you, you're not the only person in this room that has seen similar issues, including myself. I don't know if I have a magic answer for that, other than to broach the conversation and say, talk to me about what that means to you. Talk to me about why you do that. What do you get from that? And see if you can understand from their perspective, if they're able to articulate what it means to them. A lot of times they won't be able to. And so then using that as an opportunity to kind of flip the conversation and say, okay, well, let's maybe not do that as much. Or let's, you ask me for my phone a couple of times a day. I'm going to say, let's just do that once a day. Or let's just do that once or twice a week, because you're not understanding why, and therefore I'm concerned. So let's, it's again not saying, okay, never do that again, because the reality is that's the world that she's living in. But trying to see if you can hear from her what her thought is. I couldn't figure out what my kids were doing until I figured out that they were doing their streaks on Snapchat and just taking pictures of themselves and sending them off. So it didn't make any more sense to me at that point, but at least I understood the activity that they were doing at that time. So it can be dicey, but approaching it with curiosity can create more opportunity for conversation than sort of coming accusatory, like, what the heck are you doing? That's weird. That's when they'll tend to kind of shut down and maybe not be willing to open up. And if it doesn't work the first time you ask, try asking again a little bit later. You'll catch them in a different mood. Kids are moody. And a lot of times we ask, how are you? I'm fine. That's the question you get. I'm fine. They're not going to tell you a lot more than that. Other times you catch them in a moment where they want to talk. When I want to talk to my kids, we go for a car ride because they can't leave. They can't slam the door. They don't, I will go to the grocery store, which is a mile from my house, but we end up driving for 20 minutes because all of a sudden I've got them in a good conversation and I'm not ready to end it. And I usually say, okay, can you put your phone down? I just want a few minutes to chat with you today. And I'll ask them how their day is, or that's when we can start to get into some of those deeper conversations. Other questions?
Snapchat streak.
Snapchat streak. So that is a feature that was built into Snapchat by these wonderful behavioral psychologists who wanted to find more ways to get kids to use Snapchat. So a streak is the number of times you've sent messages back and forth with your friends on Snapchat for consecutive days. You break the streak if a day goes by and you don't send your snap back to them. So people have streaks on Snapchat in the thousands, and friendships have been ruined by people who have broken a streak that is significant. You will also find kids who are grounded from their phone or who go on vacation or what have you, who will give friends their login to keep up their streaks when they can't do it. And when you ask the kids, well, so why? What do you get if you have 400 streak days with that person? They don't really know. but they don't want to be the one to break the streak. So it's one of those features that sort of to us with our fully developed brains doesn't make a ton of sense, but to them, it's how the app was designed to take advantage of the vulnerability in the prefrontal cortex. And it's all about keeping score. Just score. It's a reward. Other questions? In the very back.
I'm probably not the first parent that would also chat. I see the idea of getting messages that give no reason for it. But that also makes it hard to have a conversation on why is this person on your Snapchat? What's the connection? And the second part, if the kids have started streaking, which confounds people that should not be on their list. Because if somebody new, you can pick it out right away. You go, well, this person you've been talking to for a while, these two are doing what's going on. But now they have streaks, 100 streaks with everybody. You can't really tell which one's which.
Mm-hmm.
How do you set that boundary for a conversation?
So again, in this case, very different type of streaking than when I was young, but probably equally as burdensome. That's a great question. I would be inclined to say that's where you start to say if they're not demonstrating healthy behavior and they can't articulate the connections that they have, that's where you start to say, okay, I'm not sure that you should be using this app. We want to give them an opportunity to sort of test these things out and take the training wheels off and get out there and make good choices. But sometimes they're not making good choices. And the other thing I'll say is wherever you can, be friends with your kids on these apps. I have all these apps. My kids send me streaks. I always run the streak. I always get in trouble. But I at least get a different view of what they're doing on Instagram and Snapchat if I'm friends with them. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have other accounts that I can't see or they're not putting me on their public list. And then there's the private list in Snapchat where they send certain content that everybody else can't see. But at the bare minimum, you should be interacting with your kids on these apps because you'll see some things. Kids think they've got you completely figured out, but at some point they're going to slip. At some point you're going to see something. If they're doing something they shouldn't be, that's going to be the opportunity for you to say, okay, you know what? This is an issue. We've talked about this. I don't want you to be friends on Snapchat with people you don't know. If you don't know what the relationship is, you shouldn't be interacting with them. That's our rule. If you violate the rule, you can't be on Snapchat. It really just comes down to setting those firm boundaries when they start to engage in behaviors that you feel could potentially be unsafe, or they're interacting with people that they shouldn't be interacting with. There was one more question over here. Got time for maybe one or two more? Yeah.
I was just going to mention that there's also a map on that, so you can push up on a map, and then you can also have phone because you can see all your friends are gathered in one place on the Snapchat map, and then you're wondering why is everybody over there and I'm over here, and there's icons there. That's, I would say, definitely a way to allow them to have that.
Yeah, so she's talking about Snap Maps, where you can see everybody's location that you're friends with on Snapchat. I love it because my girls forget that I can see their location, and then so it becomes a tricky parenting dilemma because I see them where they're not supposed to be. But if I call and say, what the heck are you doing there? Then they're like, wait, how did she know? Oh no, I got to shut her off my Snap Maps. So it's like that tricky area of parenting where you don't want to tell them how you know what you know. But yeah, you can see a group of friends at a birthday party that you didn't get invited to, and the anxiety and maybe the depression that can start to trigger because you know all of your friends that you can see on the map are all at one location and you're not there. It can create some challenges amongst friendships as well. And all of these features on Snapchat are ones that you can toggle on and off in the settings. So you can take off your location on Snapchat. So it's also kind of understanding and knowing what the settings are in these apps to know you could say you can use Snapchat, but you can't have a Snap Map, you can't do streaks, you can't whatever, here's our rules. If you keep those up, then you'll earn more responsibility over time. If you violate those, you'll lose responsibility or opportunity, access. So good point about the Snap Maps. They can also be a safety issue. People see where you are. If you're on vacation, people know you're not at home. I don't love that idea either. Another question back there.
On how parents can get involved with their being appropriate if the child is watching, or in your opinion, would it be appropriate for a parent to talk to another parent so the other parent wasn't there but was
So the question is, what do you do if your child is involved in bullying? Is it appropriate just to block the person, or is it maybe appropriate to call the other person's parent and have that conversation? The first question I would ask is, if your child was bullying another child, would you want that parent to call you and let you know? Absolutely. So there's your answer to that one. If it's something you would want to know as a parent, probably other parents want to know it as well. Sometimes blocking is enough. If it's a first offense, if it's not super egregious, if it's fairly mild and mundane, maybe you can get away with just saying we're going to block that person and move on. But depending on the nature of it, the severity of it, you may say, you know what, this does warrant a phone call and a conversation. And I see if you're on the receiving end of that phone call, it's really, really easy to get defensive because we all love our kids. And we all know at the end of the day, our kids are good kids and they mean well. Sometimes they do stupid things. And it's not even their fault all the time. Sometimes it's because of their prefrontal cortex. So if you do get a call from a concerned parent who's aware of something that maybe your son or daughter has done, try to be open to that conversation about what you can do to work together to make sure both of your kids are safe, because there are negative mental health things associated both with bullies and those who are bullied. There can be concerning issues with both sides. So just make sure you're kind of open to those conversations and willing to jump in and help if there really is something going on. That can be a difficult conversation, a difficult call to have. But if you know you'd want to know the same, I'd recommend trying to make sure that you give that same respect to other parents, even though it can be uncomfortable. One more question.
What about the kids who've already demonstrated that they've got ADD or they're, demonstrating anxiety disorders, maybe not fully diagnosed? In fact, are there additional strategies or measures that one should employ to manage these tools?
So the question is, what about somebody who has ADD or probably has ADD? What are the strategies or things you could use to help manage some of this? The best tool I have for you for somebody that has ADD would be to counterbalance the effects of technology with other activities. So if they like to play video games because they have ADD and that's one of the only things that will keep their attention, also make sure they're outside playing sports for several hours a week, or make sure they're getting exercise in some way, or making sure they're spending time with the family. Make sure that they're getting that counterbalance of the opposite type of activity that impacts a different part of the brain, because sometimes those are the only things that can hold kids' attention is video games for an hour. They can't pay attention to anything else, but that they could do. So again, having the limits and expectations, but how can you counterbalance some of the effects of that by making sure they're spending some time reading a book, which I know a lot of kids, if you say, go read a book, they'll say, what? I don't even know what that means. But exposing them to some other activities and doing things maybe with them to get them out. Hey, do you want to take the dog for a walk with me? My daughter used to hate doing that, and now she'll come and find me and say, hey, can we take the dog for a walk? And that's like one of my most favorite things as a parent, because she used to, I feel like I had to drag her out of the room to come and do it, but I started to do it enough and didn't let her turn me down to where now she seeks out and asks for it as well. So what can you throw in there to give the balance? If you tip the scale this way in terms of technology, what can you do in their life to help bring the scale back to balance? It's not always about taking it away, because then the scale goes all the way one direction or the other. But what can you put back on the stack on this other side to help make sure it's a little bit more even? All right, we're at time. I will provide my contact information when I send the PowerPoint out. So if anybody has any additional questions after tonight, feel free to email me or call me. I'm happy to talk that.
Close just with a final blessing. I don't know if you can hear me. First of all, thank you again. I'll just try to speak really loud, but I just want a quick story, quick word of encouragement and a blessing. The year is 1994. I'm a senior in high school. Saturday night, and I have just watched a high school basketball game with my friends. We've gone out to a restaurant after. It's about 10:30 at night, and I invite a few of them back to my house to watch Saturday Night Live. And my younger siblings are already gone to bed. My parents are asleep. We go up into the TV room, which is out of the way, and I go to plug in the TV, and I can't. So, believe it or not, my parents actually worked with an electrician so that they had this little attachment that they could take with them. Do you know how embarrassing this was? Can you just stay with me in this embarrassment? My friends are looking at like, give me 2 seconds. I know the 3 greatest hiding places they put it. I come back empty-handed. I guess the point is, I survived. I love my parents. I look back, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for some of the boundaries that I didn't always appreciate in the moment. I just wanted what I wanted when I wanted it. And so, what I want to say is sometimes when we hear the truth, like we did tonight, it can be very convicting. And that's a good thing. But it can also lead us to feeling overwhelmed or discouraged or afraid. And I really want to leave us with the message tonight. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. I love the parents who share us in help, right? There's no one in this room who's got it all, but there's tremendous opportunity to learn from each other. And we also have this sense that like God's called us into this. So it's for such a time, you know? Challenges, don't you wish you could just take the cord from the TV? Like, that was pretty simple for my parents. This presentation would have been a lot shorter, right? This is our time, and like, don't be afraid. Our faith tells us not to be afraid. So let's just say a little prayer and get you on the way. Thank you for the gift of your time tonight. Holy Spirit, we meet you. We believe that you are Spirit of truth and consolation. And we ask you to help us to be good parents, to shepherd our children with great love, to not be afraid of what we're called to. Through the intercession of the Holy Family, may God's loving blessing descend upon you this night and remain with you forever, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Buenas noches.